This video is going to cover how I coach the hip bridge, both in a two-legged or single-legged variation. So for starters, the first thing that we're going to do is make sure we have a yoga block. This is a really helpful tool as we progress basically the 90-90 hip lift, which if you're watching this video and you've worked with me before, you've likely done some work in the 90-90 hip lift position, which is where we have our feet on the wall, sometimes supported by a bench or a surface below them. And we're learning how to use the hamstrings and the posterior chain with the constraint of the foot being against the wall so that we have a point of reference. A point of reference is important so that when we move to the floor, our body knows what to do with the exercise that we just did because we've given it some context with our foot, which is the way that we get sensory information to the rest of our body. So for the hip bridge, we're going to keep a lot of the same principles that we learned in the 90-90 hip lift in place. If you're not familiar, if you're watching this video, you don't know what the 90-90 hip lift is, that's fine. You can still go through the cues that I'll give in this video to try to execute this movement, either in the two-footed or the single-footed variations, but it would probably be beneficial to go back and watch that hip lift video as well. So we're going to get down on our back. I'm going to have the block this way between my knees because that's what feels most like hip width for my body. If I was maybe a little bit smaller, I might go a little bit narrower. If I maybe had wider hips or wider shoulders, maybe I would go to that widest width of the block. So from here, I'm going to make sure that I can feel my foot on the floor with those 3 points of contact. So big toe knuckle, fourth and fifth toe knuckle, and then the heel. Then I'm going to do a little bit of a squeeze of my knees together to create some tension against that block. And I should feel the inside of my thighs starting to kind of turn on, activate, work a little bit. Okay, so those are the two setup positions, two setup points that we need to know, and now we're going to go through the whole thing. We're always going to start with a bracing breath, so I'm going to have my hands on my ribs so that I can feel this lateral expansion and feel my ribs pushing into the floor behind me so that I'm 360 degrees breathing through my torso. So with an inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, like a soft sigh, all that air goes, we feel our back flatten against the floor. And then I'm going to hold that squeeze and continue to breathe in my nose, out my mouth. Now I'm going to add that foot contact, big toe knuckle, fifth toe knuckle, and heel, pushing straight down into the ground. And I'm also going to squeeze my hips slightly off the floor by bringing the knees together. So that's kind of the last piece, is knees squeezing into the block. So my bracing, then my feet pressing into the ground, and now I'm squeezing in. As that starts to happen, as I keep that squeeze, I'm going to start to feel my torso, or feel my pelvis rather, coming up and under as my sacrum, the back part of my pelvis, begins to lift off the floor. I'm still braced, still breathing in, but I'm going to try to squeeze, keeping those points of contact nice and even against the ground for my feet. Get to the top for me, which is everything squeezed tight. I'm not overarching. I'm not trying to extend any higher here. I've just squeezed through my glutes as much as I can, pressing my feet down into the floor as firmly as I can, all while maintaining this breath. Okay, so this would be the full bridge version of the two-footed variation. And then I would just come back down nice and slow. Now the only thing that would change for the single leg variation is at the top, I'm going to bring one leg. In this case, I'll bring this leg, actually I'll bring this leg off the floor. So I'm just going to straighten that knee while still squeezing in against the block, okay? So this is sort of a progression before we would do a fully independent single leg bridge. So I'll go through the same steps. Inhale through the nose, exhale. This is our bracing breath, creating that tension, the stack between the pelvis and the rib cage. Find that tripod foot pressure. Start to squeeze through my glutes, Keeping that foot pressure nice and level. Keeping that breath going. Exhale always longer than inhale. And I get to the top of my squeeze. And then I slowly start to bring one foot up. And there might be a little bit of a shift. We want to try to minimize that as much as possible. Try to get as high as we can. And then I would bring that hip back down nice and slow. And then bring the other foot in. Okay, so those are our two-footed or bilateral hip bridge, as well as a variation to start to work toward a single leg bridge by at the top of that two-footed variation, just taking away 1 foot of support and working on holding with that single leg variation position. Okay, so make sure that you go through the process of actually doing both and starting with the two-footed variation, going into the single leg variation. Even if you've done the two-footed and single-legged variations before, do it with these cues, do it in this order, and see how it feels, okay? If you can easily do the two-footed variation, likely won't be a problem for you to progress to the single-leg version, but go through the process, show your body that you can do it, and progress from where you're at.